close your eyes. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast horizon, silence all around, the air crisp with possibility. And yet, in that silence, a question stirs. What makes life worth living, even when it hurts? This question haunted a young psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl, long before the world descended into darkness. He was a man who would one day lose nearly everything: his freedom, his very sense of safety, inside the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. And yet, against all odds, he discovered something luminous, a secret not just about survival, but about freedom. Frankl's discovery was unsettling, even radical, that suffering is not the end of meaning, but the beginning of it. That without suffering, without struggle, we may never truly be free. He called this insight logotherapy, a therapy rooted not in pleasure or power, but in the pursuit of meaning. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, we will journey through Frankl's life and philosophy, not as a lecture, but as a quiet story unfolding in gentle waves. You will hear about a boy fascinated by questions of purpose, a doctor listening deeply to the broken-hearted, a prisoner staring into the abyss and finding a reason to carry on. This is not only the story of Viktor Frankl, it is also the story of us, of every human who has ever asked, in whispered hours of the night, why am I here? What am I meant for? And how do I keep going when life feels unbearable? Settle in, breathe slowly, and let us wander into the soft night of meaning, where Viktor Frankl's philosophy becomes a lullaby for your restless thoughts. The city of Vienna, at the turn of the 20th century, was a place of unusual magic. Its streets glowed with lamplight, and in the coffee houses conversations lingered late into the night, swirling together music, philosophy, and politics like smoke rising into the vaulted ceilings. It was here, in this world, where Mozart's music still seemed to echo in the air, and Freud was beginning to probe the depths of the human mind, that a boy named Viktor Frankl was born in the year 1905. Viktor grew up in a Jewish family that was neither especially wealthy nor poor, but steady, rooted in values of education and morality. His father, Gabriel, was a civil servant, a man of discipline, law, and order. His mother, Elsa, was warm, patient, and devoted to her children. Together, they created a home where questions were welcome, where curiosity was nourished, and where the young boy's mind began to stretch itself toward mysteries that most children never considered. Even as a child, Viktor was fascinated by life itself. While other boys might have been absorbed entirely in games, he found himself tugged toward questions that had no simple answers. What is the point of being alive? Why is there joy? And why is there pain? What is freedom? And why does it matter so much to people? These were not idle daydreams, but genuine, persistent puzzles that stirred him as he walked to school or wandered the cobblestone streets of Vienna. Vienna itself offered him a kind of education that no classroom could provide. There were parks filled with lilac blossoms, libraries stacked with ideas from centuries past, and opera houses where great voices filled the night with song. Viktor absorbed it all, not passively, but with the intensity of someone who knew, even if he couldn't yet articulate it, that life's meaning must be hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered in the textures of daily existence. At school, his teachers noticed something unusual about him. He was quick to grasp complex ideas, but more than that, he was unwilling to let go of questions that seemed insoluble. While most students were satisfied with the right answer, Viktor wanted to know what made the answer true and what it meant for the human spirit. His classmates would sometimes roll their eyes when he pressed a discussion further, but the teachers recognized a seriousness in him that hinted at the path ahead. When Viktor was about 15, a turning point arrived. In a biology class, the subject of life's origins came up. Some spoke casually of evolution. Others spoke of divine creation. But Viktor was struck by something different: the fragility of life itself. What, he wondered, keeps a human being alive when so many conditions could easily snuff us out? The question pressed on him like a physical weight. He began to read everything he could find, not only in science, but in philosophy and psychology. He wanted to know not just how the body survived, but how the soul endured. It was not long before he encountered the work of Sigmund Freud, whose ideas about the unconscious were reshaping Vienna's intellectual landscape. Though still young, Viktor was drawn to Freud's attempt to map the hidden currents of the human mind. Yet something in him resisted the reduction of human life to mere drives and instincts. He felt, even then, that there was more to people than what Freud described. There was a spark, something uniquely human, that could not be explained by biology or psychology alone. As he moved into late adolescence, his curiosity deepened into something urgent. Friends began to confide in him, and he discovered that he had a gift for listening. They spoke to him of fears about school, about love, about the uncertainty of the future. He realized that when he listened, not merely waiting for his turn to speak, but truly listening, people felt lighter, calmer, as though the act of being heard had given them strength. This realization was intoxicating to him. Perhaps his calling would not be in abstract theories or endless books, but in the lived encounters between one person and another. Even before he entered medical school, Viktor had already chosen psychiatry as his path. He wanted to understand the mind. Yes, but more than that, he wanted to help people discover why life was worth living. For he sensed, even as a teenager, that many people wandered through their days half awake, burdened by confusion, despair, or aimlessness. If he could help even a handful of them find meaning, he thought, then his own life would be meaningful as well. The quiet years of his youth were marked by this steady, unshakable curiosity. In Vienna's streets and in his family's modest home, he cultivated the habit of looking beneath the surface of things, of resisting the easy answer, of searching for meaning even in the ordinary. These early experiences were, in a sense, the soil in which his later philosophy would grow. He had not yet faced the unimaginable trials that history would soon place before him, but already the seeds were planted. He was learning, slowly and quietly, to ask the kinds of questions that suffering alone could not destroy. In this gentle beginning, before the storm clouds of war gathered, Viktor Frankl was already walking a path toward his life's work. The boy with restless curiosity was becoming the young man who would one day redefine how humanity understood itself, not through abstract speculation, but through the crucible of lived experience. As Viktor Frankl stepped into his 20s, Vienna was a city alive with tension and possibility. The Great War had ended, and the city was still adjusting to its wounds. Poverty was widespread, but so too was a hunger for new ideas, new art, and new visions of what it meant to be human. For Frankl, this was both the backdrop and the atmosphere in which his early medical training unfolded. When he began studying medicine at the University of Vienna, he gravitated naturally toward neurology and psychiatry. There, he encountered the ongoing debates between Freud's psychoanalysis, with its emphasis on unconscious desires, and Adler's individual psychology, which focused on power and inferiority. Frankl respected both men, and in fact corresponded with them during his student years. Yet, something in him continued to resist their explanations. He sensed that neither drive for pleasure nor hunger for power was sufficient to explain the human condition. There was something else, something deeper, that animated human life. The world around him confirmed this intuition. Austria, battered by war and economic collapse, was filled with people who had lost hope. Suicide rates were rising, particularly among the young. To Frankl, this was not just a statistic. It was a crisis that revealed a profound truth. People were not dying because they lacked food or shelter, but because they lacked meaning. They could not see a reason to keep living. While still a student, Frankl began offering free counseling to high school students struggling with despair. He organized youth sessions where he listened to their fears and tried to help them reframe their suffering. The results were striking. Where once there had been hopelessness, new determination often emerged. Many of the students who had been considering suicide chose instead to continue, inspired not by promises of happiness, but by the discovery that their lives still had meaning that only they could fulfill. Frankl's reputation spread quickly. Soon, he was invited to lead counseling centers across Vienna, working with hundreds of young people. He did not dismiss their pain, nor did he try to argue them into optimism. Instead, he gently helped them see that even their suffering could contain meaning. Perhaps the suffering was a test of character. Perhaps it was a call to help others. Perhaps it was the soil in which future love or creativity could grow. Whatever the case, he helped them glimpse that their lives were not random accidents, but stories still being written. This insight, this conviction that human beings are driven not primarily by pleasure or power, but by the search for meaning, was the germ of what he would later call logotherapy, the therapy of meaning. Unlike Freud, who believed the psyche was shaped by hidden desires, or Adler, who saw it as shaped by will to power, Frankl believed that the will to meaning was the central force of human life. His work with suicidal patients put this theory to the test. Again and again, he sat across from people who no longer wished to live. Some had lost loved ones. Others had been humiliated, impoverished, or abandoned. Still, others felt only a nameless emptiness, a void that drained the color from their days. Frankl did not promise them happiness. He did not deny their suffering. Instead, he asked them to imagine, what remains possible for you? What task or responsibility might still be waiting? Is there a person who needs you, or a work that only you can accomplish? In these conversations, a pattern emerged. Those who found even the faintest sense of purpose were able to endure. Those who could identify a why, as Nietzsche had once written, could bear almost any how. Frankl began to see that this was not just a therapeutic trick, but a universal truth about human beings. We are meaning-seeking creatures, and without meaning, we wither. His early successes encouraged him to refine his methods. He wrote essays and delivered lectures, articulating his growing conviction that the essence of mental health was not the absence of suffering, but the presence of meaning. By the time he completed his medical degree, he had already laid the foundation for what would become one of the most influential schools of psychotherapy in the 20th century. The birth of logotherapy was not a single moment, but a gradual unfolding. It arose out of Frankl's encounters with despairing youth, his correspondence with great thinkers, and his own restless questioning. It was shaped by the suffering of a society wounded by war and poverty, and by the quiet victories of individuals who found reasons to keep living when all seemed lost. Frankl was still young, but he had already discovered his calling. He was not merely a doctor of the body, nor merely a doctor of the mind. He was becoming a doctor of meaning, one who believed that within every person there burned a spark, and that his task was to help them find it, nurture it, and live by it, even in the darkest hours. When Viktor Frankl spoke of meaning, he never meant something abstract, something hidden away in philosophy books or locked up in religious doctrines. He meant the concrete meaning that appears in the everyday fabric of life, the kind that can be glimpsed in a moment of devotion to one's work, or in the tender gaze of a loved one, or even in the quiet endurance of pain. Meaning was not, for Frankl, a distant star to be pursued only by poets and philosophers. It was available to every person, in every circumstance, and it revealed itself in three profound pathways: through work, through love, and through suffering. The first path, work, is perhaps the easiest to recognize. To pour oneself into a task, to create something that did not exist before, is one of the most direct ways a human being encounters meaning. For Frankl, work was never simply about earning money or building status. It was about fulfilling a responsibility that no one else could fulfill in quite the same way. A piece of art, a scientific discovery, a carefully raised child, even the smallest act of craftsmanship, each was an irreplaceable contribution, a fingerprint left upon the world. Frankl believed that each person has a unique task waiting for them, something that belongs to them alone. It might be a vocation, like teaching, healing, or inventing. It might be an act of service, like caring for a neighbor or preserving a tradition. Whatever form it took, this work was not interchangeable. If one person failed to complete it, no one else could do it in quite the same way. This recognition imbued ordinary labor with extraordinary dignity. Even the most modest work could shine with significance when approached with this awareness. The second path to meaning is love. For Frankl, love was not merely an emotion, nor was it simply romance or passion. Love was the profound act of seeing another human being in their entirety, in their unique and irreplaceable essence. To love someone is to affirm them as they are, to recognize their potential, to stand beside them in their struggles. Love is the bridge between souls that reveals meaning more clearly than any philosophy ever could. Frankl often recalled the memory of his wife, whose image sustained him through the darkest days of imprisonment. In the camps, where everything was stripped away, clothes, names, identities, he discovered that love endured. Even when separated from the beloved, even when he had no knowledge of whether she was alive or dead, the act of loving her gave his life direction. Love became a source of meaning that nothing external could destroy. Through love, one finds not only companionship, but also a mirror of life's deepest truths. But it is the third path that sets Frankl's philosophy apart from so many others. Suffering, he insisted, can also be a source of meaning, not suffering sought out recklessly, nor suffering inflicted unjustly by others, but the suffering that inevitably comes to every human life, the pain we cannot avoid or change, when work and love are stripped away, when the ordinary avenues to purpose are closed. Suffering itself becomes the arena where meaning is forged. For Frankl, suffering was the ultimate test of freedom. He saw that people could lose everything, their homes, their health, even their future, and still remain free in how they chose to face their suffering. One person might crumble in despair, another might grow bitter, but a third could transform their suffering into a testimony of dignity and courage. Meaning, in this way, was not extinguished by suffering but revealed through it. This idea may seem severe, even unsettling, yet it carries a strange comfort. Because suffering is unavoidable, and because it touches all lives, it means that no life is excluded from meaning. Even in tragedy, perhaps especially in tragedy, human beings retain the capacity to discover significance. The illness that cannot be cured, the grief that will not be soothed, the injustice that cannot be reversed, all of these can become occasions to assert the most profound truth of all, that even in pain, life remains worth living. Together, These three paths, work, love, and suffering, form a kind of map of the human condition. They are not rigid categories, nor are they mutually exclusive. Often they intertwine. A parent's work is animated by love. An artist's creation emerges from the crucible of suffering. A caregiver finds meaning both in the act of service and in the bond of love with the one cared for. What unites them is the possibility of transcending oneself, of moving beyond mere survival into the realm of significance. For Frankl, the beauty of this triad lay in its universality. It required no special background, no privilege, no particular talent. The poorest laborer could find meaning in their work. The loneliest prisoner could find meaning in the memory of love. The sick and suffering could find meaning in the way they bore their pain. No one, he insisted, was excluded. The opportunity for meaning was always present, waiting to be grasped. This conviction would become the anchor of his philosophy, the foundation upon which logotherapy was built. Long before the camps, long before the horrors that would test these ideas to their limits, Frankl recognized that meaning was not a luxury, but the very essence of human existence. To live without meaning, he believed, was a kind of spiritual death. To discover meaning through work, through love, or through suffering was to be fully alive. By the 1930s, the shadows that had gathered over Europe were lengthening. Vienna, once the vibrant capital of music and intellect, began to darken under the rise of political extremism. Streets that had once hummed with cafe chatter now carried whispers of danger. Posters, slogans, and rallies signaled the steady encroachment of a new ideology. An ideology that promised order and greatness, but carried beneath it the poison of hatred. For Viktor Frankl, the changes were not distant political shifts. They touched his world intimately, reshaping the very air he breathed. As a Jewish psychiatrist, he soon felt the walls of restriction closing in. Professional opportunities grew fewer, social hostility increased, and friends disappeared into silence or exile. Yet through these tightening constraints, Frankl did not abandon his work. In fact, he doubled down on it. He had begun directing a psychiatric ward in Vienna, focusing on patients at risk of suicide. These were years marked by economic collapse, humiliation after war, and despair that gnawed at the young in particular. Frankl worked tirelessly, offering them not only treatment, but genuine human presence. He reminded them that their lives, no matter how burdened, carried a responsibility to others and a possibility of meaning that no one else could fulfill. His interventions were credited with reducing suicide rates among young Viennese dramatically. But as the 1930s drew to a close, the question before him became stark. Should he leave, or should he stay? Like many Jews, he had opportunities to emigrate. A visa to the United States was within reach, a chance to escape what was clearly becoming a perilous situation. He wrestled with the decision, torn between survival and duty. In the end, it was love and responsibility that anchored him in Vienna. His parents were aging, increasingly vulnerable, and he could not bring himself to abandon them. He also felt bound to his patients, who were themselves adrift in the storm that was descending. To leave them behind seemed, to him, a betrayal of everything he had been teaching, that each life carries a task, and that one's meaning often lies precisely in one's responsibilities. And so he stayed. The annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany in 1938 accelerated the crisis. Anti-Jewish laws stripped families of their rights, their businesses, their dignity. For Frankl, even his professional credentials were diminished. Yet he continued to find ways to serve. He secured a position in a hospital where Jews were still permitted to practice. And he dedicated himself to the care of those most at risk, often people who had lost everything and now considered ending their lives. What stands out from this period is not just his medical skill, but his unyielding humanity. Amid propaganda, persecution, and fear, he offered patients the reminder that their lives still contained meaning, even if they could not see it at that moment. His conviction did not eliminate their suffering, but it gave them a foothold, a reason to endure even one more day. The shadow of war deepened as Germany invaded Poland, and soon the world was engulfed in conflict. Air raids, shortages, and arrests became part of daily life in Vienna. Friends disappeared, neighbors vanished. Yet Frankl remained steady, carrying out his work, even as his own freedom narrowed. His decision to stay was not one of naive optimism, but of conscious choice. He knew danger was inevitable, but he also knew that to abandon his duty would mean losing the very essence of what gave his life meaning. This choice would shape the course of his destiny. It would place him directly in the path of suffering unimaginable, but it would also confirm, in the harshest crucible, the truth of what he had long believed, that meaning is discovered not in comfort, but in the courage to face reality as it is, and to respond with dignity. As the war loomed over Vienna, Frankl prepared not by escaping, but by standing firm, bound by love for his parents and responsibility for his patients. The quiet questions of his youth, the theories of his early practice, were about to be tested in a fire that would either destroy them or prove them beyond all doubt. The trains that carried prisoners to Auschwitz were not built for human travel. They were freight cars, bare wooden boxes, with a single slit of light near the roof and no space to sit except upon the hard floor. Families pressed together, men and women holding tightly to children, belongings clutched to their chests as if the little bundles of clothes and photographs and books might still mean something. For days, the train rattled across Europe, the sound of iron wheels grinding against iron rails filling every moment, leaving no room for thought, except the questions no one dared to speak aloud. Where were they being taken? What awaited them at the end of the line? Viktor Frankl, like so many others, rode in such a car. The air was suffocating, thick with sweat, fear, and the faint smell of straw. Every jolt and stop of the train heightened the silence of dread, broken only by whispered prayers or the occasional sob. The prisoners had already been stripped of their homes, their work, their communities, but they still clung to the remnants of personal identity. A coat that had belonged to a father, a treasured manuscript, a wedding ring, a photograph, carefully hidden inside a shoe. These scraps of memory were like talismans, evidence that they were still themselves, still more than the faceless crowd crammed into the wooden darkness. When the train doors finally opened, the night air was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of smoke that was heavier and stranger than any fire they had known before. Floodlights cut through the darkness, throwing long shadows on the ground. Guards barked orders in a language meant to intimidate. Dogs strained against their leashes, and the prisoners stumbled down from the cars, blinking into the blinding light. It was here that the stripping away of identity truly began. Lined up in rows, people were examined in seconds, a gesture from an officer deciding who would live to work and who would be sent directly to death. Old people, young children, the sick, and those who looked frail were waved to one side. The stronger, the ones who could still carry loads or dig trenches, were waved to the other. Families were torn apart in the space of a heartbeat. Husbands pulled away from wives, children ripped from parents' arms, the screams drowned out by the mechanical efficiency of orders repeated again and again. Frankl, like the others who were chosen to live for the moment, was marched into the camp. Behind the gates stood the barracks, long wooden buildings lined with barbed wire and towers. The air was heavy with fear, and yet there was also the eerie quiet of submission. Prisoners who had been there longer moved with the mechanical rhythm of those who knew what awaited the new arrivals. The shaving of heads, the confiscation of belongings, the loss of names, the little bundles of possessions clutched so desperately on the train were taken away immediately. Coats, shoes, photographs, all were tossed into piles, sorted not by memory, but by utility. A suitcase filled with manuscripts or letters was dumped out, its contents discarded as meaningless scraps. The treasures of a lifetime were reduced to a heap of cloth, to be distributed or destroyed without a second thought. Next came the stripping of the body itself. Prisoners were forced to undress, their clothes taken from them, their hair shaved away. Every mark of individuality, every strand of hair, every personal belonging was erased. In exchange, they were given coarse uniforms that had belonged to others before them, uniforms stiff with dirt, and shoes that rarely fit. They became indistinguishable from one another, reduced to lines of shorn heads and hollow eyes. Perhaps the most devastating loss came with the erasure of names. Numbers were tattooed on arms, and from that moment, the individual ceased to exist in the eyes of the camp. A man was no longer Viktor, no longer son, no longer husband or doctor. He was a number, one more figure in a ledger of forced labor and death. For those who entered the camp, this stripping away was more than humiliation. It was an assault upon the very core of identity, a calculated attempt to erase the self. Yet amid the despair, something curious stirred. Some prisoners, even as they lost everything external, clung to an inner whisper that could not be touched. For Frankl, the manuscript of his book, confiscated and likely burned, symbolized this challenge. His life's work was gone, reduced to ashes. Yet he realized that while the physical pages could be destroyed, the meaning behind them, the knowledge and insights they contained, still lived within him. Though his body was imprisoned, there remained within him something that no guard, no gate, no number could erase. The gates of Auschwitz closed behind the new arrivals with a sound that seemed final, like the shutting of a tomb. Yet within that tomb flickered a faint light, the fragile but unextinguishable human spirit that even systematic dehumanization could not wholly destroy. In the camp, each day was a test of endurance. Hunger gnawed constantly at the body. Cold seeped through thin uniforms. Exhaustion blurred the edges of thought. The cruelty of guards and the indifference of the system reduced life to a struggle for survival. And yet, Viktor Frankl discovered that even here, even in conditions designed to crush the human spirit, there was a refuge that remained untouched, the inner freedom to choose one's attitude. The discovery was not sudden but gradual, unfolding in the small spaces between moments of terror. There were days when despair seemed overwhelming, when the sight of another prisoner collapsing from hunger pressed down on him like a weight. There were mornings when he awoke, shivering in the barracks, with work ahead that seemed impossible. And yet, in the midst of such suffering, he noticed something remarkable. He saw that people responded differently. Some sank quickly into bitterness, lashing out at others, hoarding scraps of bread, letting cruelty seep into their souls. Others, though no less hungry, no less cold, seemed to find a way to preserve dignity. They shared their last morsel, spoke words of comfort, or simply carried themselves with quiet strength. It was here that Frankl realized that while external circumstances could strip away everything, there remained one freedom that could not be taken: the freedom to choose how one would respond. This freedom, though small in appearance, was immense in power. A man could decide, in that moment, whether he would surrender to despair or cling to hope, whether he would become less human or more fully himself. This realization became a kind of refuge, a sanctuary within. No guard could invade it. No hunger could consume it. Frankl would later describe it as the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. And this freedom was not an illusion. It was the very essence of being human. When despair threatened to overwhelm him, Frankl would sometimes retreat into memory. He would imagine himself lecturing in a classroom, speaking to students about the psychology of the camps, as if he had already survived and was now teaching from the other side. In those moments, he discovered that even suffering could be turned into purpose. Even pain could be transmuted into insight. The thought that he might one day help others to endure similar trials gave his own suffering meaning. At other times, his refuge was love. The memory of his wife, her face vivid in his imagination, became a source of strength. Even without knowing whether she lived or had perished, the act of loving her gave him direction. He realized that love did not depend on physical presence, that it could sustain the heart even in absence. In those moments, when the camp faded and her image filled his mind, he felt himself connected to something beyond the barbed wire, beyond the cruelty. There was also meaning to be found in the smallest choices: to comfort another prisoner, to keep a fragment of humor alive, to observe the sunset over the fences, and remember that beauty still existed. Each of these acts, however fragile, was a declaration of freedom. Each was a refusal to let the camp determine the entire shape of the soul. The inner refuge did not erase suffering. The hunger remained. The cold remained. The fear remained. But it created a space in which suffering could be endured with dignity and even transformed into a kind of triumph. By choosing his attitude, by holding fast to the conviction that meaning remained possible, Frankl discovered that he was never wholly at the mercy of circumstance. This lesson, born in the harshest of conditions, became the heart of his later teaching. The freedom to choose one's attitude is not limited to concentration camps. It is present in every life, in every situation. We may not control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond. That freedom, fragile but indestructible, is the foundation of human dignity. Within the inner refuge, even as the world collapsed outside, Frankl found a kind of peace. Not the peace of comfort or safety, but the peace of knowing that meaning could never be destroyed. In the camps, suffering was not a concept to be debated or written about in a book. It was an unavoidable, constant companion. Hunger was never satisfied. Cold bit through the skin like a permanent shadow, and exhaustion weighed on every movement. Around Viktor Frankl, men and women wasted away before his eyes, their faces becoming gaunt, their voices fading into whispers. It would have been easy, almost natural, to see suffering as nothing more than an enemy, a destructive force, intent on crushing everything that made a person human. And yet, Frankl began to see something else. He began to notice that suffering, while brutal, could also teach. This was not suffering sought out for its own sake, nor the glorification of pain. It was the sober recognition that pain is one of the few things that can never be entirely eliminated from human life. If it cannot be avoided, then perhaps it can be approached differently. Frankl realized that the way a person confronted suffering often revealed the deepest truths about who they were. In the morning marches to labor sites, he watched men shuffle through the snow, their feet wrapped in rags instead of shoes. Some muttered curses, collapsed, or struck out in anger at their fellow prisoners. Others, though no less weary, moved with quiet composure, their eyes focused not on despair, but on the endurance of one more step, one more hour. What made the difference? Frankl came to see that it was not the quantity of suffering, since all suffered, but the meaning one attached to it. Those who saw their suffering as utterly senseless crumbled more quickly. Those who believed that it could serve some purpose, even a hidden one, found within themselves a strength that defied explanation. The camp became, in this way, a grim classroom. Suffering was the teacher, and its lesson was that human beings always retain the capacity to decide what their suffering will mean. One man might see his hunger as proof that life is cruel and meaningless. Another might see his hunger as an opportunity to prove to himself that he can endure without losing dignity. The external conditions were identical. The inner interpretation made all the difference. Frankl often thought of the words of Nietzsche. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. In Auschwitz, this was not a philosophical slogan. It was a fact that separated those who succumbed quickly from those who survived longer. A man who suffered for the sake of someone he loved, or for the possibility of finishing a task, or simply to bear witness, endured in a way that others did not. Suffering stripped life down to its essence, and in that essence, meaning revealed itself more clearly than ever before. There were moments when Frankl himself felt his strength falter. Hunger would press upon him so heavily that his thoughts blurred, or despair would creep into his heart when yet another prisoner collapsed beside him. In those moments, he would deliberately remind himself that his suffering could become a kind of testimony. If he endured, if he could find meaning in the pain, then perhaps one day he could help others understand that life is never void of purpose. His own pain became, in this way, the seed of hope for others. Suffering as teacher does not always instruct gently. It strips away illusions, revealing what lies beneath. In the camp, it revealed greed, cruelty, and despair in some. It revealed courage, compassion, and resilience in others. For Frankl, it revealed that meaning was not found in comfort or ease, but in the capacity to face hardship without surrendering one's humanity. Outside the camp, in ordinary life, the same principle applies. No one escapes suffering entirely. Illness, grief, disappointment, and loss visit every life. The lesson is the same. We cannot choose whether we will suffer, but we can always choose what suffering will mean to us. It can harden us, or it can open us. It can break us, or it can deepen us. Suffering is not simply an enemy. It is also a teacher, showing us who we are and offering us the chance to become more than we were. This reframing of pain was not a denial of its horror. Frankl never pretended that suffering was good in itself. He did not romanticize hunger or death or grief, but he insisted that within suffering there lies the possibility of transformation, the possibility of finding meaning where none seems to exist. That possibility is the doorway through which despair can be turned into dignity. In this way, suffering became not just a curse, but also a kind of secret gift, a teacher that whispered, "Even here, even now, you are free to decide who you will be." Amid the vast machinery of the camps, where death was counted in numbers, and human beings were reduced to statistics, meaning often revealed itself not in grand gestures, but in the smallest acts. A crust of bread slipped quietly into another's hand. A kind word whispered, when despair threatened to overwhelm. These tiny offerings, insignificant in ordinary life, became treasures of infinite value in the world behind barbed wire. Frankl recalled watching a fellow prisoner share a fragment of bread with someone even hungrier than himself. The act was so small that, to an outsider, it might seem almost meaningless. What difference could a mouthful of bread make when starvation loomed constantly? Yet within the camp, that fragment of bread was not just food. It was a symbol. It said, "I still see you as human. I still believe in giving, even when I have nothing to give." In such moments, Frankl recognized that dignity and kindness could survive even in the harshest conditions. The same was true of words. A simple sentence, spoken with compassion, could lift a prisoner from despair, if only for an hour. When a man whispered encouragement during a march through snow, or when someone reminded another that they had once been loved, the effect was immediate and powerful. It was not the end of suffering, but it was a reminder that suffering was not the end of meaning. These small acts often determined who lived and who died, though not in the physical sense alone. They kept alive the flame of the spirit. They told the suffering soul that humanity had not been extinguished, that even in a place built to destroy, there remained a stubborn insistence on love. Frankl himself received such kindnesses, and he gave them as well. A patient word to another prisoner, a gesture of understanding when someone faltered. These became lifelines. They were not dramatic rescues, but quiet affirmations that life was still worth living. In reflecting on these experiences later, Frankl observed that meaning does not always reveal itself in monumental achievements. More often, it shines in fleeting moments, in the gentle touch of one life upon another. The crust of bread, the kind word, these are the places where eternity meets time, where the smallest act becomes infinite in significance. It is easy, in ordinary life, to overlook such gestures. A word of thanks, a listening ear, a smile offered to a stranger, these seem small, perhaps too small to matter, but in truth, they may carry a weight beyond what we can measure. Just as in the camp, where bread and words became sacred, so too in daily life can the smallest acts alter the course of another's journey. The lesson Frankl drew from this was clear. We should never underestimate the power of what we can give, even when it seems insignificant. When all else is stripped away, meaning is often found in the smallest exchanges, the moments when one person affirms another's humanity. In the camps, survival often depended not only on strength of body, but on strength of spirit. And spirit was sustained not by grand gestures, but by small acts of kindness, repeated quietly, again and again. A crust of bread, a kind word, symbols of infinite value, reminding us that even in the darkest of places, light can still be shared. There were nights in the camp when the cold crept so deeply into Viktor Frankl's bones that even sleep offered no escape. The straw mattress beneath him was damp, the air sharp with frost, and the bodies around him shifted restlessly, groaning in pain or murmuring in broken dreams. Hunger hollowed out the hours, and fear of what the next day would bring pressed down on the chest like a heavy stone. Yet in those moments of near despair, Frankl found that his mind drifted not toward bread, not toward warmth, but toward love. He thought of his wife. He did not know whether she was alive or dead. She had been deported to another camp, and in a world where life could be extinguished in an instant, silence about her fate was as loud as grief. But the uncertainty did not matter. Her image lived in him, luminous, unshakable. In the darkness of the barracks or the long marches through snow, her face rose before his mind's eye, and with it came a strange kind of strength. It was not simply memory, it was presence. He discovered that love transcends physical proximity, that it does not depend on touch or sight or words. In the camp, stripped of everything, he realized that the act of loving his wife gave his life direction. It lifted him beyond the fences, beyond the cruelty, into a space where meaning endured. Frankl would later write that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which a person can aspire. This was not sentimental reflection, but a truth tested in the harshest of laboratories. When men staggered under hunger and exhaustion, when all other motives dissolved, it was often love that kept them going. The memory of a child, the hope of seeing a spouse again, the devotion to someone waiting beyond the camp, these became anchors in the storm. For Frankl, his wife became his anchor. He remembered the way her eyes looked when she listened, the softness of her voice, the warmth of her presence beside him in ordinary life. These details, so small in the comfort of peacetime, became treasures in captivity. They reminded him that love was real, that it existed beyond cruelty, that it bound him to something greater than himself. There were moments on the work sites when exhaustion nearly defeated him. The shovel weighed heavy, the icy wind bit at his face, and he felt himself close to collapse. In those moments, he would think of her. He would see her standing in front of him, her expression filled with quiet trust, and suddenly, the weight became bearable, not because it grew lighter, but because he understood why he must endure. His suffering became linked to his love, and through that bond, he found the courage to continue. The astonishing thing was that her actual fate did not change the power of his love. Even if she had already perished, the meaning of his devotion remained untouched. Love existed not only in the presence of the beloved, but also in the soul of the lover. It was indestructible. This realization gave Frankl a sense of inner freedom. The Nazis could strip away his clothes, his home, his identity, but they could not strip away his love. It was his to carry, unbroken. This is why Frankl would later insist that love is not merely an emotion, but an existential act, a way of affirming the deepest value of another person. To love is to say, your existence gives meaning to mine, even when separated by death, even when separated by silence. That meaning persists. Love, he discovered, is the ultimate anchor, keeping the human spirit from drifting into the abyss. For those listening now, drifting perhaps toward sleep, consider this: the person you love, whether near or far, whether alive in this moment or preserved only in memory, continues to be a source of meaning for you. The act of loving them is itself a testament that life carries significance. Frankl's nights in the barracks, his days on the frozen marches, were illuminated not by bread, not by warmth, but by this realization: love endured when everything else was gone. The camp was a world of filth, of suffering bodies, of cruelty, repeated daily. The sky was often gray, the ground muddy, the fences lined with barbed wire. And yet, Viktor Frankl noticed that even there, beauty appeared, not in abundance, not in ease, but in flashes, moments of transcendence that lifted the soul beyond the reach of despair. There were evenings when, after hours of labor, the prisoners were herded back toward the barracks. The air was bitter, their steps heavy, their bodies bent. Yet above them stretched the sky, immense and painted with colors the camp could not erase. Frankl recalled one sunset in particular, when the horizon blazed with shades of crimson and gold. The prisoners, worn and silent, stopped in their tracks, gazing upward. In that moment, It was as if time paused. No guards, no hunger, no fear, only the vast beauty of the world beyond the wire. Someone whispered, "How beautiful the world could be." The words carried a kind of awe, almost disbelief. And for a moment, they were not prisoners, but simply human beings, witnesses to something greater than themselves. These glimpses of beauty were not luxuries. They were sustenance. They reminded the prisoners that life contained more than cruelty, that existence itself had layers the Nazis could not touch. A single star in the night sky, a bird flying overhead, even the delicate pattern of frost on a window pane, each became a portal into transcendence, a reminder that the universe still held wonder. Frankl himself found strength in such moments. On days when suffering pressed too heavily upon him, he would deliberately lift his eyes to the sky, reminding himself that beauty existed, that life was not confined to the barbed wire surrounding him. He understood that beauty does not erase suffering, but it transforms the context in which suffering is endured. It offers a glimpse of eternity within time, of meaning within chaos. In these transcendent moments, Frankl discovered that the human soul is capable of rising above circumstance. Even in horror, there is space for awe. Even in despair, there is room for wonder. These moments do not come on command, but when they arrive, they carry immense power. They reveal that no matter how much life is stripped away, existence itself still whispers of meaning. Prisoners who could still recognize beauty, even fleetingly, often fared better than those who could not. To pause before a sunset, to notice the softness of falling snow, was to assert that the world was not only brutality, that there remained something worth living for. Frankl called this the capacity for transcendence, the ability to step outside of immediate suffering and encounter life's greater dimensions. For those outside the camp, the lesson remains just as urgent. Beauty surrounds us, though it often goes unnoticed in the rush of daily life. To pause, to look at the sky, to notice the play of light through leaves, to listen to a bird's song, these are not trivial distractions. They are sources of meaning. They are reminders that life is more than its hardships, that wonder is woven into existence itself. In Auschwitz, a sunset became a cathedral, a bird, a messenger of freedom. These were the fragments of transcendence that sustained Frankl and many others. And for those who listen now, perhaps preparing to rest, the same truth applies. Meaning often arrives quietly, in moments of beauty that ask only that we notice. When Viktor Frankl looked back on his time in the camps, he did not pretend that survival was something anyone could fully control. Chance played its role, whether one was sent to labor or death upon arrival, whether one caught the eye of a guard in a bad mood, whether disease found its way into the body. The line between life and death was often drawn arbitrarily, a flick of a hand determining fate. Yet beyond the randomness, Frankl observed something subtler, something invisible to those who looked only at the body. He noticed that survival was shaped not merely by physical strength or youth, but by meaning. It was not always the strongest who endured longest. Sometimes the physically frail lived on while the robust collapsed. Frankl began to ask why. What was it that sustained the will to survive when the body seemed almost finished? He concluded that those who found some purpose, some reason to keep going, had a different kind of resilience. They bore their suffering differently, and in doing so, they often endured longer. There was a man who spoke constantly of his child waiting for him, a child he was determined to see again. His eyes lit with determination when he mentioned the boy's name, and even though his body weakened, his will propelled him forward, one day at a time. There was another who had been working on a scientific manuscript before his arrest. He would whisper to himself, again and again that he must survive in order to finish it. Each prisoner who clung to a why discovered a reservoir of strength that others who saw no reason lacked. By contrast, Frankl saw men give up. They would wake one morning, lie down on the straw, and refuse to move. They no longer rose for roll call, no longer lifted their tools. Their eyes lost their light, their bodies, their tension. Within hours or days, they were gone. It was as if, in relinquishing meaning, they had relinquished life itself. The body, deprived of purpose, surrendered. Frankl himself faced such moments of despair. There were days when the cold seemed endless, when hunger clawed so violently at the gut that he thought he might collapse. Yet when he reminded himself of the book he still longed to write, of the patients he still longed to help, of the testimony he could one day offer to others, he discovered he could bear the suffering a little longer. The thought of a future task pulled him forward, step by step. This was not wishful thinking. It was not a denial of reality. It was a recognition of the power of meaning in the economy of human existence. Frankl realized that man is not destroyed by suffering alone. He is destroyed by suffering without meaning. And conversely, he can endure unimaginable suffering if it serves a purpose. Survival was not only about having food or avoiding illness. It was about inner orientation. Some prisoners lived as though they had already died, while others lived as though life, even in its cruelty, still demanded something of them. The difference lay not in what they endured, but in why they endured it. Frankl's insight into this truth became the foundation of his later work. Meaning is not a luxury. It is not optional. It is a necessity for the soul, as vital as bread is for the body. A man who knows why he suffers can bear almost anyhow. In Auschwitz, this was not metaphor. It was daily reality, proven in the lives and deaths of those around him. For those beyond the camp, the lesson remains. We may not face the same horrors, but we all confront suffering, illness, grief, loss, disappointment. They come to every life. And when they do, what makes the difference is not whether the suffering can be avoided, but whether it can be imbued with meaning. The person who suffers for love, for a cause, for a responsibility, bears their pain differently than the one who suffers without purpose. Meaning shapes endurance. This is why some survive, and others do not. Not always in the literal sense, for chance still plays its part. But in the deeper sense, survival is tied to meaning. The body may be broken, but the spirit that clings to purpose resists destruction. Frankl's testimony from the camps remains a solemn reminder. If we wish to live not merely to exist, we must discover our why. Without it, the how will crush us. With it, we may endure far more than we imagine possible. After the war, Frankl returned to Vienna, carrying with him both the weight of loss and the clarity of insight. The camps had confirmed for him a truth he had long suspected, that human beings need meaning in order to live. But outside the barbed wire, he found a different danger awaiting society, one less visible, but no less destructive. It was not the danger of starvation or forced labor, but the danger of emptiness. He called it the existential vacuum. Modern life, he observed, often strips people not of their possessions or their names, but of their sense of purpose. In the rhythm of daily routines, in the pursuit of comfort and distraction, many drift without direction. They wake, they work, they consume, they sleep, and yet within them there is a hollow silence. This emptiness is not always dramatic. It does not always announce itself with cries of despair. Often it hides beneath busyness, behind entertainment, within the restless hunger for novelty. But beneath it lies a profound truth. People do not know why they live. Frankl saw this vacuum expressed in countless ways. Patients came to him with depression, anxiety, or addictions. But beneath the symptoms, he often found the same root cause, a lack of meaning. They had material security, but no purpose. They were free to choose, but did not know what to choose for. Freedom without direction became a burden. In the absence of meaning, people clung to pleasure or power, hoping these would fill the void. Yet pleasure without purpose soon becomes empty, and power without service corrodes the soul. This emptiness, Frankl argued, was a modern epidemic. In previous eras, meaning was often handed down through tradition, religion, or culture. People knew their place, their duties, their role in a larger story. In the modern world, with traditions weakened and certainties questioned, individuals were left to construct meaning on their own. This freedom was both a gift and a threat. Without guidance, many fell into the vacuum. The consequences were visible in rising rates of despair and suicide, in the spread of nihilism, in the restless search for distractions. People filled their days with noise because silence revealed the emptiness within. They pursued consumer goods, fleeting pleasures, endless stimulation, but none of these answered the deeper question: what is the meaning of my life? For Frankl, the existential vacuum was as dangerous as the deprivation of the camps, though in a different way. In the camps, meaning was threatened by suffering. In modern society, meaning was threatened by comfort. Both could destroy the human spirit if the will to meaning was ignored. The cure, Frankl insisted, was not to impose meaning from outside, but to awaken people to their own responsibility. Each person must discover what life is asking of them, in their unique situation, with their unique gifts. Meaning is not invented like a story, nor dictated like a command. It is discovered, moment by moment, in the tasks and relationships that call to us. To live without meaning is to drift like a ship without anchor. To live with meaning is to feel the pull of a current that guides and sustains. The danger of emptiness is that it leaves us vulnerable to addiction, to despair, to manipulation. The promise of meaning is that it fills the vacuum with purpose, giving us strength to face both joy and suffering. Frankl's warning about the existential vacuum remains urgent today. Our world offers more distractions than ever before, yet the hunger for meaning persists. We are surrounded by noise, yet many lie awake at night with the same silent question: why am I here? It is not an academic question, but the very heart of existence. And if it is left unanswered, the vacuum swells. Frankl's answer was simple, though never easy. Meaning is found not in what we demand from life, but in what life demands from us. The task is not to ask why life is worth living, but to realize that life is asking us what we will live for. In embracing that responsibility, the vacuum dissolves and existence becomes full again. When Viktor Frankl returned from the camps and resumed his work as a psychiatrist, he faced a challenge. The world had changed, and so had he. His experiences had burned away illusions, leaving him with a sharper, simpler conviction that the central task of human life is not to pursue happiness or power, but to uncover meaning. He had witnessed this truth in the camp, where those who had a purpose survived longer, where those who felt their lives were still required by something or someone beyond themselves found the strength to endure. Now, in his therapy room, he sought to help his patients find the same discovery. He called this approach logotherapy. The word comes from logos, the Greek term for meaning. Logotherapy is not about analyzing the past endlessly, nor about probing hidden desires, nor about indulging in abstract speculation. It is about turning the patient's gaze toward the future, toward the tasks life is placing before them. Frankl would often ask, not, "What do you want from life?" but, "What is life asking of you?" In that reversal lies the essence of logotherapy. Life is not a riddle we demand an answer to. It is a summons we must answer with our own responsibility. Patients came to him suffering from despair, emptiness, or anxiety. Many complained that they felt nothing mattered anymore, that their lives were hollow. Rather than treating this as mere pathology, Frankl treated it as an invitation. He believed their despair was not proof of sickness but evidence of the most human hunger, the will to meaning. Just as hunger for food reveals the existence of bread, so too does hunger for meaning reveal that meaning is possible. Logotherapy was not about giving people answers. It was about helping them discover their own. Frankl might listen quietly as a patient described their hopelessness, then gently ask, "What prevents you from ending it all?" Often the answer revealed the person's hidden why, a responsibility to a child, an unfinished work, a devotion to another human being. By drawing attention to that purpose, Frankl shifted the patient's focus away from despair toward responsibility. He showed them that life was not meaningless. It was calling them to act. He would use vivid techniques to awaken this awareness. One was paradoxical intention, where he encouraged patients to confront their fears directly, even exaggerate them, to break the cycle of anxiety. Another was dereflection, where he guided them to shift their attention away from themselves and toward others, toward service and love. But beneath these methods, the foundation was always the same: to help people uncover their why. He often reminded patients of Nietzsche's words, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." This was not an abstract principle, but a living truth. Patients who rediscovered their sense of purpose often found their despair lift, their anxiety lessen, their emptiness dissolve. A mother who wanted to give up found strength when reminded of her child. A scientist drowning in depression found resolve when he remembered his unfinished research. A bereaved husband discovered meaning in honoring his wife's memory by living with dignity. What made logotherapy different from other forms of therapy was its insistence on responsibility. It did not soothe people with illusions. It did not promise endless happiness. Instead, it reminded them that life is asking something of them. Every day, every moment, is a question, and the individual must answer with their choices. Sometimes the answer lies in creating a work, sometimes in experiencing love, and sometimes simply in how one bears suffering. Frankl compared life to standing before a blank canvas. No one can paint it for you. Each person must take the brush and make their own strokes. The fear of making mistakes is real, but to refuse to paint is to waste the canvas entirely. Meaning is discovered not in abstract reflection but in concrete action, in the way one responds to life's demands. What makes logotherapy simple and yet profound is that it applies to everyone. You do not need wealth, education, or extraordinary gifts. Meaning is found in the ordinary as much as in the extraordinary. Caring for a child, tending a garden, speaking a kind word to a stranger, all can be answers to life's call. And in these answers, the vacuum of emptiness is replaced with the fullness of responsibility. For those listening now, lying in the quiet darkness, perhaps with your own worries and doubts, consider this: life is asking you something, not in a distant future, not in abstract philosophy, but in this very moment. What responsibility calls to you? What person needs your love? What task remains unfinished? Your meaning may not be grand, but it is yours. And in uncovering it, you may find the strength to bear whatever suffering tomorrow brings. This is logotherapy explained simply. Not a theory, not a formula, but a reminder. Life is not something we interrogate. It is something that interrogates us. And our answer, the way we live, the love we show, the endurance we embody, is where meaning is revealed. One of the most radical aspects of Viktor Frankl's philosophy is his rejection of happiness as life's ultimate goal. In a culture where people often chase pleasure, comfort, and satisfaction, Frankl stood apart. He argued that happiness cannot be pursued directly. It is not something we capture by running toward it. It is a byproduct, a side effect of fulfilling our responsibility. If we make happiness our aim, we miss it. If we make meaning our aim, happiness often follows quietly behind. Frankl saw this distinction most clearly in the camps. Those who clung to pleasure, who longed for comfort, above all else, were quickly broken. Pleasure could not survive hunger. Comfort could not withstand cruelty. But those who oriented themselves toward responsibility, toward love, toward duty, toward some greater purpose, found reasons to continue, even when happiness was impossible. Their lives had meaning, and from that meaning came an endurance that pleasure alone could never supply. After the war, he noticed the same truth in modern society. People sought happiness through wealth, entertainment, and comfort, yet often felt restless and empty. They mistook pleasure for purpose, and when the thrill faded, they were left with nothing. Frankl warned that the pursuit of happiness for its own sake leads only to frustration. Happiness is like laughter. It comes not when forced, but when it arises naturally from living rightly. What, then, should replace the pursuit of happiness? For Frankl, the answer was responsibility. Every person is responsible for answering life's questions, for fulfilling tasks that only they can fulfill, for serving others in ways that only they can serve. This responsibility is not a burden, but a privilege. It affirms that our lives matter, that our choices carry weight, that existence itself is asking something of us. Frankl often used the image of life as a courtroom. We are not the judges, demanding to know why life is worthwhile. Life is the judge, asking us to justify how we spend our days. Each choice is our testimony. Each act is our answer. Responsibility, not pleasure, is the measure of our lives. This is why he called happiness a byproduct. When we love someone deeply, when we create something meaningful, when we endure suffering with dignity, happiness arises naturally, like warmth from a fire. But if we chase happiness without responsibility, the fire burns out. It becomes empty, fleeting, unsatisfying. Frankl's emphasis on responsibility is deeply liberating. It means that no matter our circumstances, meaning is available. We may lose wealth, comfort, or health, but responsibility remains. There is always a way to respond with dignity. Always a task we can fulfill, even if that task is simply to bear suffering with courage. This shift from pleasure to responsibility transforms life. It moves us from fragile satisfaction to enduring significance. For listeners now, perhaps lying in the stillness of night, Frankl's words offer comfort. You do not need to pursue happiness as if it were a treasure, always out of reach. You do not need to fear that life is meaningless if you do not feel joy in every moment. Instead, you are invited to ask, what is life asking of me right now? The answer may be small, an act of kindness, an unfinished duty, the courage to face tomorrow. But in answering, you will find that happiness, quiet and unforced, often follows. Frankl's insistence that life is about duty, not pleasure, is not a denial of joy. It is a recognition of its source. Joy comes not from chasing itself, but from living responsibly. And in that responsibility lies the secret of a fulfilled life. In Auschwitz and the other camps, Viktor Frankl witnessed what happens when human beings are stripped of almost everything that usually defines life. Gone were the comforts of home, the security of work, the dignity of possessions. Gone were the small routines that give shape to daily existence. Even names were taken away, replaced with numbers tattooed on the skin. The prisoners were reduced to shadows of themselves, their identities broken down by hunger, cold, and fear. And yet, Frankl discovered something extraordinary. Even when stripped of everything, there remained one freedom that no guard, no barbed wire, no deprivation could take away. It was the freedom of the mind, the freedom to choose one's response to the circumstances in which one found oneself. This realization did not come easily. It emerged through pain, through observing himself and others in moments of extreme suffering. He noticed that while the camp conditions were the same for everyone, people responded differently. Some became cruel, hoarding scraps of food, striking out in bitterness, surrendering to despair. Others, though just as weak and hungry, managed to hold on to kindness, to dignity, to a quiet courage. Frankl saw that the difference lay in the inner decision. Even in the face of unavoidable suffering, each person retained the power to decide whether they would let the camp define them, or whether they would rise above it in spirit. This freedom to choose one's attitude, however small it seemed, was in fact the most profound freedom of all. He remembered moments when, after a brutal day of labor, he would sit in the barracks, too weak to speak, his body aching. In those moments, he would feel despair creeping close, threatening to consume him. But then, he would remind himself that he could choose how to interpret his suffering. He could let it crush him, or he could use it as an opportunity to test the strength of his spirit. That choice remained his, untouchable by the camp. The freedom of the mind is not the freedom to control what happens to us. It is the freedom to control how we respond. In the camps, that response might be as simple as enduring one more day with dignity, or offering a kind word to a fellow prisoner, or lifting one's eyes to a sunset and letting beauty in for just a moment. These were not grand gestures, but they were declarations of freedom, proof that the human soul cannot be enslaved unless it consents. Frankl understood that this freedom is what makes us human. Animals respond to instinct, machines to programming, but humans have the ability to step back from their circumstances and say, "This is what has happened to me, but this is how I will respond." That gap between stimulus and response is the space of freedom. And in that space lies our dignity and our humanity. Even after the war, when he returned to a world still scarred by loss, Frankl insisted that this freedom of the mind is available to everyone, not just to prisoners in camps. We cannot always control illness, injustice, or loss, but we can always choose our response. We can decide whether suffering will harden us or soften us, whether it will make us bitter or make us wise, whether it will strip us of our humanity or deepen it. This freedom is both a gift and a responsibility. It means we are never merely victims of circumstance. We are always participants in our own lives, always able to decide what kind of people we will be. Even when we are powerless over events, we are never powerless over ourselves. For Frankl, this realization was not only a source of survival in the camps, it was a philosophy for life. He taught his patients that while they could not avoid pain or hardship, they could always choose their response. That choice gave them back their freedom. Even when the world seemed determined to take it away. As you listen now, perhaps lying in the quiet, consider how this truth applies to your own life. There are things beyond your control, uncertainties, challenges, losses, but within you remains a space of freedom, the power to decide your response. No one else can touch it. No one else can take it away. In that space lies your strength, your dignity, and your humanity. This was Frankl's greatest discovery, that freedom of the mind is the last of human freedoms, and the one that makes all others possible. When Frankl spoke of work, he did not mean simply employment or the routines of labor done for survival. He meant the deeper task of creation and contribution, the way in which work allows each of us to express our uniqueness and fulfill our responsibilities. Work, in this sense, is one of the most important pathways to meaning. In the camps, the prisoners were forced to work endlessly. They dug trenches, carried heavy loads, labored in the cold until their bodies gave out. That work was meaningless, designed only to exhaust and humiliate. It revealed the destructive power of work when stripped of purpose. Meaningless work corrodes the soul. It teaches despair. Frankl saw how this kind of labor wore men down faster than hunger alone, because it deprived them of the sense that their suffering contributed to anything beyond itself. But outside the camp, work could be transformed into the opposite, a source of fulfillment, a reason to live. Frankl believed that each person has a task waiting for them, something only they can accomplish. It may be small or large, public or private, but it is theirs, and if they fail to fulfill it, the opportunity is lost forever. This idea made every life significant, because every life carried responsibilities that no one else could fully replace. For Frankl, his own work became a lifeline. He dreamed of rewriting the manuscript that had been stolen from him upon entering the camp. Though the physical pages were gone, the knowledge, the insights, still lived within him. He resolved that if he survived, he would bring them back to life. This sense of unfinished work gave him a reason to endure the cold, the hunger, the despair. The thought of that task pulled him forward, reminding him that his suffering was not pointless. Work, in its highest sense, connects us to something beyond ourselves. It allows us to contribute to the world, to leave a mark, to create something that outlasts our suffering. A teacher finds meaning in shaping young minds. A caregiver finds meaning in tending to the vulnerable. A writer finds meaning in words that touch others. Even small daily tasks, when approached with responsibility, carry meaning. Cooking a meal, cleaning a space, solving a problem, these acts, too, can affirm life when seen as contributions rather than chores. Frankl observed that those who oriented themselves toward meaningful work fared better in life than those who pursued only pleasure. Pleasure fades quickly, but work that serves a purpose leaves lasting fulfillment. Even when it demands sacrifice, even when it is hard, meaningful work nourishes the soul. It anchors us in responsibility, giving our days direction. He reminded his patients that their work need not be grand to be meaningful. It did not matter if they built a business, painted a masterpiece, or simply cared for their family. What mattered was that they recognized the unique value of their contribution. To perform one's work with devotion, to see it as an answer to life's demand, was to live meaningfully. Frankl's message resonates deeply in a world where many struggle with monotony. People often complain of routine, of days that feel repetitive. But Frankl would remind us that even repetition can be meaningful when it is done for love or responsibility. A parent who wakes every morning to provide for their children is not simply repeating tasks. They are fulfilling a unique mission. A nurse who tends to patients day after day is not just following protocol. They are answering life's question in the form of service. To find meaning in work requires a shift of perspective. It is to ask not, "What do I get from this?" but, "What am I giving through this?" When work becomes service, when it becomes contribution, it becomes purpose. And in that purpose, life finds dignity. Frankl himself lived this truth. After surviving the camps, he dedicated his life to his work, not as a way to chase happiness, but as a way to answer responsibility. He lectured, he wrote, he counseled, always driven by the conviction that his work mattered because it helped others discover meaning. This devotion gave shape to his days and fulfillment to his life. As you rest tonight, you may think of your own work. It may not feel grand or extraordinary, but it is yours. Ask yourself, who does it serve? What contribution does it make? In seeing your work as purpose rather than obligation, you may discover the quiet meaning that has always been there. For Frankl, work was never just labor. It was a pathway to meaning, one of the clearest ways to transform daily effort into fulfillment. And in this transformation lies one of life's greatest gifts. To know that our work, however ordinary, is our answer to the question that life asks of us each day. Viktor Frankl often said that love is the highest and final goal to which a human being can aspire. When stripped of everything else, when life circumstances reduce a person to their barest essence, it is love that remains. It was not theory for him, nor sentiment, but lived truth, discovered in the most desolate conditions imaginable. He discovered it in the camps, where all material signs of affection were absent, and yet where memory and devotion revealed the indestructible depth of human relationships. In the camp, prisoners had nothing. They could not give gifts. They could not speak freely. They could not touch those they loved outside. But in their minds and hearts, they carried those bonds with them. And those bonds gave them reasons to endure. Frankl remembered vividly the way his wife's face came to him in the silence of the morning marches. He would imagine her eyes, her gentle expression, the way her presence once filled his life with warmth. It was not fantasy, nor an escape from reality, but a grounding truth. Through her, he remembered that life was still worth living, that even in separation, love could be a source of meaning strong enough to outlast suffering. This revealed to him something profound. Love is not dependent on proximity. Love does not fade when distance grows. Love does not dissolve when death intervenes. It is an affirmation of the essence of another person, and once affirmed, it exists forever. In this way, relationships are not simply about shared experiences or physical closeness. They are about the recognition of another human soul in its unique and irreplaceable depth. Frankl also recognized that love allows us to see beyond appearances. When we love someone, we do not see only their current state. We see their potential, their essence, their inner truth. A person in pain or in weakness may appear diminished, but love reveals their dignity and worth even more clearly. In this sense, love is not blinded by suffering. It clarifies. It allows us to see not just what is visible, but what is eternal. For those in the camps, the thought of reuniting with loved ones gave hope. For others, even if they knew reunion was impossible, the act of loving itself gave purpose. Frankl noted that a man could lie in the darkness of a barrack, his body weakened, and yet in his mind, he could hold conversation with his beloved, feel her presence, and in that act he could endure one more night. Such was the power of love to make life bearable even when everything else was unbearable. This insight did not remain confined to the camps. After the war, Frankl wove it into the heart of logotherapy. He taught that love is one of the clearest paths to meaning because it lifts us beyond ourselves. It turns our focus outward, toward another person. And in that turning, we discover purpose. A person who lives only for themselves is prone to despair. A person who lives for another is sustained. Love also transforms ordinary experiences into sacred ones. The act of caring for a child, the act of listening to a spouse, the act of standing beside a friend. These are not mere tasks. They are moments of meaning, ways in which we answer life's question by affirming the worth of another. And in affirming them, we discover our own worth. Frankl believed that relationships are irreplaceable. No one can take the place of another person we love, because each human being is unique. Each carries their own essence, their own value, their own voice in the chorus of existence. To love someone is to say, "You cannot be replaced. Your being is precious to me." This is why loss hurts so deeply, and also why love gives such profound meaning. Because in recognizing another's uniqueness, we step into the realm of the eternal. As you listen now, perhaps lying in the dark, think of the ones you love. They may be beside you, or far away. They may be alive, or they may exist now, only in memory. Yet your love for them is real, enduring, unshaken by distance or time. In loving them, you discover meaning. In remembering them, you find strength. Love is not only about receiving affection, but about giving it freely, about holding another's essence as sacred. And this, Frankl insisted, is one of the deepest answers to the question of why we live. For Frankl, love was not just an emotion, but the foundation of life's meaning. It connected him to his wife in the darkest nights, and it connected every person to the eternal truth that relationships are the fabric of existence. In love, we transcend ourselves. In love, we find purpose. In love, we glimpse eternity. Suffering is often seen as the enemy of life, something to be avoided at all costs. And yet, Viktor Frankl discovered that suffering, when it cannot be removed, can become a profound source of meaning. This discovery was not made in comfort or abstraction, but in the crucible of Auschwitz and Dachau, where pain was relentless, where despair stalked every day. The lesson he drew was stark. Life is not primarily about pleasure, nor even about avoiding suffering. Life is about meaning. And when suffering comes, meaning can still be found not by erasing the pain, but by transforming one's response to it. Frankl noticed that in the camp, those who could see their suffering as a test, as a challenge, or as a responsibility, bore it differently. A man who thought of his child waiting for him endured hunger with more courage. A woman who believed her suffering could be a testimony of faith bore cold with more dignity. It was not that suffering itself was good, but that it could be given meaning by the way it was faced. He realized that suffering is like raw material. It can destroy, or it can be shaped into something that reveals inner strength. A prisoner who carried himself with dignity in the face of cruelty was demonstrating freedom of spirit. A person who chose kindness, even when in pain, was proving that suffering had not broken their humanity. These choices transformed pain into inner freedom, showing that meaning does not depend on comfort. Frankl himself endured unimaginable hunger, cold, and loss. His family was gone, his body was weak, and death was always near. Yet he chose to frame his suffering as part of his responsibility. He imagined himself lecturing in the future, explaining to students how he endured. And in that vision, he gave his pain a purpose. He carried it not as meaningless torment, but as preparation to help others. In doing so, he found freedom, even behind barbed wire. This is why he later wrote that suffering ceases to be suffering in some way at the moment it finds meaning. Pain remains pain. Grief remains grief, but it is transformed, reframed, and borne with dignity. Suffering without meaning crushes. Suffering with meaning ennobles. Outside the camps, the lesson is no less vital. Illness, loss, disappointment. These come to everyone. The temptation is to despair, to see them as senseless. But Frankl invites us to ask instead, how can I respond to this? What responsibility does this suffering call me to? Sometimes the answer is to endure with courage, to set an example for others. Sometimes it is to turn pain into service, to help those who suffer similarly. Sometimes it is simply to remain human when circumstances tempt us to surrender our humanity. Suffering, in this way, becomes the crucible of freedom. It reminds us that while we cannot choose what happens, we can always choose who we will be in response. And in that choice, we discover a freedom deeper than comfort. A freedom no one can take away. Frankl never romanticized suffering. He did not say it was good or desirable. He said only that when it comes, and it will come, it can be given meaning. And in that meaning lies our strength. As you close your eyes tonight, perhaps reflecting on your own trials, consider this: your suffering, too, can be transformed. It can become your testimony, your responsibility, your source of freedom. Pain does not strip away meaning. It reveals it. E8 to P2 and the 11 to P. High. And in facing it with dignity, you discover the indestructible part of yourself, the part that no hardship can ever enslave. When Viktor Frankl was liberated from the camps in 1945, the war was ending, but his own journey was far from finished. He stepped out of the gates alive, but his body was weak, and his heart carried the scars of everything he had endured. He returned to Vienna, to the city of his childhood and his studies. But it was not the same city, and he was not the same man. The elegant streets and familiar buildings carried ghosts. He had survived, but his parents, his brother, and his beloved wife had not. The grief was immense, and for a time it threatened to engulf him completely. And yet, out of that grief arose the very conviction that had sustained him in the camps, that suffering can be given meaning. He could not bring back the lives of those he loved. He could not erase the horrors he had seen, but he could bear witness. He could use his survival to speak, to write, to offer others the insights that had kept him alive when so many others had perished. In a burst of energy fueled by grief and responsibility, Frankl set to work writing. He poured out his experiences, his observations, his philosophy, onto paper. The result was a slim book that he originally thought might only be of modest interest. It was called Man's Search for Meaning. Within its pages, he told the story of the camps not as history alone, but as a testimony to the resilience of the human spirit. He explained how people could endure suffering if they found meaning, how the will to meaning is the deepest drive of the human being, how even in the most inhuman conditions, humanity can survive. The book was published in 1946, and to Frankl's surprise, it spread quickly beyond Austria, beyond Europe, into the wider world. Readers everywhere, from scholars to ordinary people, were struck by its honesty and clarity. It was not sentimental, not detached, not merely theoretical. It was the testimony of a man who had seen the abyss and returned to tell what he had learned. The book's impact was profound. In a world still reeling from war, still mourning losses too great to count, Frankl's message resonated deeply. He did not offer easy comfort. He did not say suffering could be erased. Instead, he offered something far more powerful: the assurance that suffering could be transformed into meaning. That assurance reached millions of hearts, giving them strength to face their own trials. As the book spread, Frankl himself became a figure of global significance. He lectured across continents, spoke to audiences large and small, and taught in universities. Wherever he went, he carried the same message: life is meaningful under all conditions, even the most miserable. The key is not to ask what we expect from life, but to realize that life expects something from us. Frankl's work as a psychiatrist also flourished. He refined logotherapy, training therapists, and counseling patients, always with the same central insight: the will to meaning is what sustains us. He developed methods to help people discover their unique responsibilities, their own reasons to endure, and to flourish. In doing so, he provided not just theory, but practical tools for lives that had grown empty or despairing. The legacy of man's search for meaning grew steadily. Translated into dozens of languages, read by generations, it sold millions of copies. Readers returned to it again and again, finding in its pages new strength for their own circumstances. Students studied it, soldiers carried it. People facing illness or grief drew comfort from it. The book became one of the most influential works of the 20th century, shaping not only psychology, but the wider culture's understanding of meaning. Frankl himself lived to see the vast impact of his work. Though he remained humble, he often said that his survival was not due to his own strength alone, but also to chance, to grace, and to the responsibilities that called him forward. He knew that countless others who were just as strong had perished. But because he had survived, he carried the responsibility of testimony. He bore that responsibility faithfully until his death in 1997. His legacy is not only the book, not only logotherapy, but the reminder that human beings are capable of withstanding immense suffering if they have meaning. His life itself became a symbol of that truth, showing how even the most broken existence can be rebuilt into a life of service and inspiration. As you reflect on his legacy, perhaps you sense why his book continues to resonate. It speaks to something universal. It reminds us that meaning is not a luxury, not an optional extra, but the very core of human life. Without it, we collapse. With it, we can endure more than we ever thought possible. Frankl's return to Vienna was marked by grief, but from that grief came a gift to the world. Through his writing and his teaching, he gave millions a reason to keep living, a reason to endure, a reason to find meaning, even in their own pain. This is his legacy: that his suffering was not wasted, but transformed into wisdom that continues to guide us today. Now, as our journey through Viktor Frankl's life and philosophy draws to a close, let us rest in the gentle truth he discovered: that life has meaning under all conditions. Not only when it is comfortable, not only when it is joyful, but also when it is painful, uncertain, or difficult. Meaning is always there, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be embraced. As you lie quietly now, perhaps in the stillness of your room, perhaps with the soft rhythm of your own breath keeping time, you may allow these thoughts to settle deep within you. Frankl taught that each of us has a task, a responsibility that belongs to us alone. No one else can live your life. No one else can fulfill your duties. Your existence, with all its struggles and triumphs, is a unique answer to the question that life asks. Remember that freedom of the mind is always yours. No matter what happens, no matter how little you control in the world outside, within you remains the power to choose your response. This freedom is your dignity. It is your strength. It is the part of you that no one and nothing can take away. Think, too, of love. Love is not only the memory of those you cherish, nor only the presence of those beside you. It is the recognition of another soul as precious, irreplaceable, eternal. To love is to step into meaning, to anchor yourself in a truth deeper than suffering. Even in absence, love endures. Even in silence, love speaks. And when suffering comes, and it always comes, in one form or another, remember Frankl's wisdom. Suffering cannot always be avoided, but it can always be given meaning. It can be borne with dignity. It can be transformed into inner freedom. When you face hardship, you may ask, what is life asking of me now? How can I respond with courage, with humanity, with love? In that response, even pain is turned into purpose. As you drift now toward sleep, carry with you the quiet assurance that your life has meaning. You do not need to demand it from the universe. You do not need to chase it desperately. It is already present, woven into the fabric of your existence, revealed in your responsibilities, your work, your relationships, your endurance. Perhaps as your eyelids grow heavy, you will imagine Frankl himself, standing before his students, speaking softly, "Life is meaningful under all conditions." Hear those words as though spoken to you directly. They are true of your life, too. Even the struggles you carry now can become the soil of transformation. Even the unanswered questions in your heart can become part of the story of meaning. Let your breath slow. Let your mind ease. Know that as you rest, you are still living out the meaning of your existence. Tomorrow will bring new questions, new responsibilities, new opportunities to choose your response. For now, let the wisdom of Frankl be your companion as you cross the threshold into dreams. Sleep gently, with the assurance that your life has purpose. Sleep, knowing that love, responsibility, and meaning anchor you. Even when the world feels uncertain, sleep in the quiet strength of inner freedom, the freedom no one can take away. And as you drift deeper, let Frankl's gift to the world become your gift to yourself, the calm conviction that no matter the suffering, no matter the darkness, life is always worth living, because life always holds meaning. As you settle deeper into rest, may your dreams be calm and your heart be light. Sleep well tonight, knowing that tomorrow you carry with you the quiet strength of meaning. And if you happen to still be awake, you can choose one of the 2 videos now on your screen to continue this journey of reflection and peace. If these stories bring you comfort, don't forget to subscribe, so you'll always have a place to return to when you need gentle wisdom to guide you into sleep. Good night, and may peace be with you.